"She is pretty, Daddy." The obese bride was laughed off, until the cowboy's daughter called her beautiful. Montana Territory, 1885. The white steeple of Snow Pine Church pierced the gray November sky like a solemn prayer. Inside, every pew was filled. Men removed their hats, women clutched handkerchiefs. The town had gathered to honor their fallen sons. Farmers turned soldiers, husbands buried under foreign flags. Hymns floated through the air like smoke from the wood stove near the altar. Then the doors opened. Hannah Whitfield stepped in, and silence spread like frost. She wore ivory satin, creased but clean, yellowed in the seams from time, but unmistakably a wedding dress. Her full figure pressed against the fabric, and her gloved hands held a single lily. She walked slowly down the aisle, chin raised, eyes forward, every step echoing louder than the hymn that had just ended. Whispers stirred. Is that her wedding dress? Has she lost her mind? Mercy, look at the size of her. She's making a spectacle. A sharp laugh rang from a woman in the back pew, too loud to be accidental. Well, the woman smirked. Who's going to tell her she's pretty now? The church rippled with stifled laughter. Hannah felt every giggle like a needle to the ribs. Her breath caught, her heart thudded. But she didn't stop, didn't flinch. If I keep my head high, she thought, maybe they'll see me as someone who belonged to love once. Maybe they'll remember he chose me. Her late husband, James, had once kissed her hand in this very church. Now all she had left was a memory and a dress. She reached the front, laid the lily at the memorial altar, and turned. Her face was flushed, her hands damp beneath the gloves. The laughter behind her didn't fade, neither did the sting. She couldn't stay. She didn't belong. Hannah turned and walked out the door. The cold slapped her face as she stepped into the snow-choked afternoon. Her boots crunched along the frozen steps. She reached the edge of the porch, chest rising in short, shamed breaths. Her vision blurred. She didn't see the man leaning against the oak beam. "I saw what they did," he said. She startled, then froze. Weston Dyer stood in the shadow of the porch, his hat low, coat buttoned to the neck. He didn't step toward her, just watched, calm, still as the mountains behind him. I just wanted to honor him," she said, voice trembling. Weston nodded once. His voice was gravel and gentleness. "You did." She looked away. They laughed. They always laugh. "They may don't know better." He reached into his coat, pulled out a folded handkerchief and held it out without a word. She hesitated, then took it. "Why do you care?" she whispered, voice barely a thread. Weston's gray eyes met hers. "Because everyone deserves to be seen with respect, especially when they're grieving." That one sentence struck deeper than all the jeers. It didn't pity her. It acknowledged her. She held the handkerchief to her eyes. "I thought maybe wearing the dress would remind them I was once loved." Weston didn't answer right away. Then he said, "It reminded me." She looked up. He tipped his hat gently, then stepped past her, down the steps, into the snow. Hannah stood there a moment longer, her breath misting in the cold, the wind catching at her skirts. And somewhere inside, buried beneath the shame, a small flicker of warmth stirred. Sometimes all it takes is one man not to laugh. Sometimes dignity needs only one witness. And if that moment stirred something in you too, don't forget to tap the hype button and follow us here at Wild West Love Stories, where honor meets heart under a sky wide enough for second chances. The snow had settled into silence by the time Weston found her again, standing near the back steps of the church, the hem of her ivory dress soaked with slush. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, watching her trace the grain of the wooden rail with a trembling finger. "You did something brave in there," he said finally. She turned, startled. "Wearing a dress?" she asked, half a laugh, half a plea. "Showing up," he answered, "knowing they'd tear you apart for it." Her hands fluttered around the lily stem she still held. It was foolish. "No," he said, eyes steady. "It was honest." She said nothing, waiting for the rest, for the pity, the polite farewell. But instead, he cleared his throat. "I run a horse ranch north of town, Hollow Ridge. It's too quiet, too cold, and it's always needing more hands than I have." He hesitated. "I've been looking for someone to help around the house, someone steady, someone Isla can count on." Her brows pulled together. "You want to hire me?" "I want to offer you a job," he said simply. "With Weston met her gaze without flinching. "Because you're not afraid of standing alone. Because you didn't run when they laughed, and because my daughter needs someone kind." She blinked at him, confused. "But I'm not, look at me. People laugh at me. I'm not looking for pretty," he said, then paused, amending softly. "Though I wouldn't say you're not." A blush crept up her neck. She looked down. "I don't know what to say." "Say yes." She opened her mouth, then hesitated. Her heart was pounding. "Unless," she murmured, "this is out of pity." His voice sharpened slightly, not unkind, but firm. "I don't pity anyone who works hard and holds their head up. I need help. You need a place. That's all." She searched his face. It was weather-worn, unreadable, but not unkind. A soft voice called from behind him, "Daddy." A small girl bounded toward them, her coat trailing behind like a flag in the wind. Her curls were honey-colored and wild, her cheeks pink from the cold. She stopped just short of Hannah, peering up with wide, curious eyes. Then she grinned. "Pretty lady," she announced, grabbing the edge of Hannah's dress. Hannah's breath caught. No one had called her that, not in years, not even in kindness. Tears welled instantly. She crouched down, voice trembling. "What's your name, sweetheart?" "Masla," the girl said proudly. Hannah smiled, and Isla smiled back, the kind of smile that didn't weigh the world before it was offered behind them. Weston stood very still, watching them both. She's lovely," Hannah said softly. "She doesn't say much to strangers," Weston murmured. "She's not a stranger," Isla declared, then looked up at her father. "Can she come home with us?" Weston's lips twitched. "That depends on the lady." Hannah wiped her eyes with the handkerchief still in her pocket. "I've never been much good at cooking. I overboil tea. I fold sheets the wrong way." "I don't drink tea," he replied, "and Isla sleeps in a mess of blankets anyway." Hannah looked down at Isla's small hand curled around her fingers. She looked back up at Weston. "All right?" He nodded once, solemn, as if they'd sealed something bigger than a contract. Isla gave a little jump. "Yay! Pretty lady is coming." The laughter that spilled from Hannah's lips was light and real, surprising even to herself. As they walked down the snow-packed road together, Isla skipping ahead, Weston steady beside her, Hannah realized she hadn't felt this kind of warmth in years. Not since before the wedding. Not since she believed someone could look at her and not see shame. Not since she had been called beautiful without needing to earn it. And she hadn't known until now just how much she missed being wanted, without conditions, without whispers, without apologies. The wind howled through the trees on Hollow Ridge, but inside the cabin it was warm and quiet. Mostly. Hannah moved cautiously through the kitchen, her hands fumbling over a pot of stew that had boiled over. The smell of burnt onions clung to the air, and she winced as she wiped the rim of the iron stove. It was her third mistake that morning. Earlier, she had broken a bowl while trying to dry dishes too quickly, and the day before she had made Isla's bed the wrong way, tight corners instead of the child's usual loose quilt piles. She tried to breathe, but the weight of failure pressed hard. Just do not be a burden, she told herself. If you can stay out of the way, maybe they will not change their mind. She had been in the cabin for 4 days. 4 days of waking early, scrubbing with cold water, fumbling through tasks she'd never been taught. Her old life had been different, quiet, small, never expected to care for anyone else. She had no one then. Hollow Ridge, even in its silence, felt full. She stirred the stew again, too fast this time. Some sloshed onto the stove. Her shoulders tensed. Footsteps approached behind her. She turned quickly. Weston stood there, glancing at the bubbling pot but saying nothing. He set down a tin bucket beside the stove, steam curling from the spout of the kettle inside. "For washing," he said simply. Hannah blinked. The water was warm. "Thank you," she whispered. He only nodded and stepped back out. She watched the door swing softly behind him. No lecture, no sigh of disappointment, just a bucket of warm water. Later that evening, after Isla had finished her supper and sat on the floor with her pencils, Hannah found herself watching the girl from the doorway. Isla was humming, a tune only a child could know, and scribbling furiously onto a scrap of brown paper. "You're very focused," Hannah said gently. Isla looked up, beaming. "It's you." "Me?" The little girl held up the drawing. It was clumsy and crooked, an oval face with round cheeks, curls, a dress, and what looked like a flower in one hand. Hannah felt her throat tighten. "Pretty lady," Isla said. "That's what I call you." Hannah crouched down, blinking fast. "That's very kind." Isla crawled over to Weston, who was mending tack near the hearth. "Daddy?" she said, holding out the picture. "Look." Weston took the drawing carefully, studying it. His fingers brushed the edge where Isla had pressed too hard and torn the paper. His eyes lingered on the simple smile Isla had drawn on the face. "She's pretty," Isla said again, leaning against his leg. Weston said nothing, but he folded the picture gently and slipped it into the inside pocket of his vest. He didn't look at Hannah, who stood just far enough away to notice but not interrupt. That night Hannah found a folded towel on the end of her bed, warm from the stove, with a piece of hard candy resting on top. No note, just a quiet kindness. She sat on the edge of the bed, hands clasped in her lap. "He's not like the others," she thought. And still, a voice inside whispered, "But that doesn't mean he sees you." She did not know what he saw, not yet, but she knew he had not once called her a burden, not once. The wind was sharp that morning, the sky a bright, unclouded blue that belied the chill. Hannah had just finished hanging linens when Isla's laughter rang out, sharp and light, like a bell tossed on the breeze. She turned toward the sound and froze. Isla had slipped away again, this time past the fence, her little boots crunching over the frost-stiff grass of the paddock. Beyond her, 3 unbroken horses stirred, their manes wild in the wind. One of them, silver-gray and full of restless muscle, snorted, pawed the earth, and reared its head. "No!" Hannah shouted. Isla turned at the sound, surprised, but too late. The horse was already tense, sensing movement, preparing to charge. Hannah didn't think. Her feet moved before her mind caught up. She sprinted across the field, skirts flying, heart pounding. The cold bit at her face, but all she saw was Isla's small figure frozen in fear. The horse lunged. Hannah threw herself forward and wrapped Isla in her arms, turning her back toward the animal just as hooves thundered past. Dust flew, a scream caught in Hannah's throat. But then, arms, strong, pulling. Weston. He had come running, grabbed them both, and dragged them through the gate as the horse veered off with a wild snort. They collapsed onto the ground, Isla sobbing into Hannah's shoulder, Hannah gasping for breath, trembling from head to toe. Weston crouched beside them, his face ashen, breath ragged. "Are you—" he began, but stopped when he saw Isla's face buried in Hannah's arms. He reached out, brushing a hand over his daughter's curls. "It's all right. You're all right." She clung tighter to Hannah. When Isla finally calmed, Weston looked up, his eyes meeting Hannah's. For a long moment, neither spoke. Then, quietly, he said, "You didn't even hesitate." Hannah's voice was hoarse. "She was out there alone. You could have been trampled." "I didn't care." The silence that followed was thick with things neither of them had words for. Weston looked down, then back at her. His gaze lingered, not on her mistakes, not on her figure, not on her past, but on the way she held Isla like something sacred. "You're more important than you think, Hannah," he said softly. She blinked, unsure if she had heard him right. He didn't repeat it. That night the house was quiet. Isla fell asleep clinging to her father's shirt, a soft hiccup escaping every few breaths. Hannah returned to her room in silence, her limbs sore, her back aching. But at her door something waited. A small, hand-carved wooden comb, smooth, polished, inlaid with a tiny heart carved into the handle. No note, just the gift. She picked it up slowly, fingers brushing the grooves, Weston's doing. It had to be. Her throat tightened. No man had ever given her something without expecting something in return. No one had ever thanked her in silence. She sat on the edge of the bed, brushing her fingers over the carved heart again and again. She didn't cry, but something inside her, something long buried, breathed a little easier. And somewhere beyond the walls, Weston stood at the barn door, watching the snow begin to fall. He didn't say much, but tonight he had said enough. By the end of her second week at Hollow Ridge, the townsfolk had begun to whisper again. It started in the general store. A sideways glance, a muttered name. "I heard she was run out of Red Valley. They say it wasn't just a job she lost. She seduced the son of a prominent family. Ha ha, she's trouble, that one, wearing a wedding dress like it meant anything." Hannah heard pieces of it, sliced through burlap sacks of flour and quiet footsteps behind her back. She tried to ignore it, to keep her chin high, but it scratched at the edges of her piece like thorns through fabric. One afternoon, as she carried a basket of apples back from town, she nearly dropped it at the sound of a voice behind her. "Well, if it isn't the belle of the scandal." She turned. Samuel Price stood there, tall, polished, wrapped in a coat too fine for the dust of Montana. His smile was all teeth, his eyes the same pale blue that once watched her too closely in a library full of books hadn't softened a bit. "Didn't expect to find you this far out," he said, stepping closer. "You always did have a habit of disappearing." Her voice came out small. "Why are you here?" "I heard whispers about a girl with red cheeks and a past no one could quite name. I came to see if the rumors were true." She took a step back. The basket trembled in her arms. Samuel clicked his tongue. "No need to be rude. I came with an offer. I don't want anything from you." "Oh, but you do," he said smoothly. "Your name's still dirt in Red Valley, still a stain on paper, even after all these years." His voice dropped. "But I could help change that. Letters, a retraction, A few kind words to the right people, maybe even enough to let you walk into a church without them laughing. She stared at him, bile rising in her throat. In exchange for what? She asked, her voice flat. He smiled. For coming back, for finishing what you started. Her slap landed before she knew her hand had moved. He staggered back, stunned. You lied, she said, breath shaking. You ruined me. And now you think I'd let you own me again? I gave you a way out, he snarled. I gave you the chance to matter again. The voice that answered wasn't Hannah's. She already does. They both turned. Weston stood just beyond the fence gate, arms crossed, jaw clenched. He walked forward slowly, every step like thunder. Samuel straightened. This is between us. No, Weston said. You made it about the town when you branded her with your lies. You made it mine when you showed up here thinking she was still defenseless. She has a reputation. Weston's eyes narrowed. You think honor is something you assign. You don't get to define what she's worth. Samuel's nostrils flared. You don't know what she did. Weston stepped forward, toe to toe now. His voice dropped to a low, lethal calm. I know she wakes before dawn. I know she scrubs and sews and burns herself, trying to make someone else's house feel like home. I know she throws herself in front of a horse for my daughter. He leaned in. And I know there's not a shred of her that needs your permission to be whole. Samuel said nothing. Weston stepped back, opened the gate, and looked to Hannah. You all right? She nodded, but her eyes were glassy, wide. Samuel scoffed, adjusted his collar, and turned. You'll regret this. I doubt it, Weston muttered, as Samuel vanished into the distance. Hannah stood frozen. Weston looked at her. You never have to answer for who you were, only who you are. And that night, in the silence of Hollow Ridge, Hannah realized the whispers in town had changed. They still talked, but now they said things like, she must have meant something for Dyer to defend her like that. Maybe we had her wrong. She risked herself for that child, you know. Respect, like trust, wasn't bought. But sometimes it began with one man who stood at the gate and said, Enough. The fire crackled in the hearth of the Hollow Ridge cabin. It was a rare, quiet evening. Isla had fallen asleep early. Her small form curled beneath a patchwork quilt, one hand still clutching the edge of her drawing pad. Hannah stood in the kitchen, drying the last tin cup, when she heard voices outside the front window. Low, earnest. She moved closer, not intending to eavesdrop, but the wind carried words in clear fragments through the frost-glazed pane. Your daughter needs stability, came the voice of Reverend Emmett, the town's pastor. A home should have a mother as well as a father. A pause. You've grieved long enough, Weston. You're a good man, but the child deserves better than a house kept by a woman like that. Hannah's breath caught in her chest. Then came Weston's voice, calm, certain. I don't need another wife. Her hand froze on the cup. I didn't ask her to stay here for that, he continued. I needed help with Isla. She has done more than anyone expected. That's all. That's all. Hannah turned from the window. The cup slipped from her hand and clattered into the wash basin, but she barely noticed. So that's what I am to him, she thought. Help, a place filler. Not someone worth fighting for, not really. She walked into her small room, closed the door with care, and sat on the edge of the bed. The wooden comb Weston had given her sat neatly on the nightstand. She stared at it for a long time before she reached for her satchel. Her hands moved slowly, folding her shawl, tucking away a few belongings. Not everything, just enough to disappear without making a sound. She glanced at Isla's room. She will forget me, Hannah whispered. Children forget. By the time the moon was high, the wind had picked up again, tugging at the corners of the cabin. Hannah slipped out the door, shawl wrapped tightly around her, boots crunching through the snow. She didn't hear the soft footsteps on the stairs behind her. Isla woke with a start. Her room was too quiet, too empty. She padded to Hannah's door and pushed it open. The bed was made, the comb was gone. "No," she whispered. Her little fists clenched. No, she wouldn't leave me. She grabbed her coat from the peg and rushed outside, calling into the snow, "Hannah! Hannah!" But the storm swallowed her voice. She kept running, past the barn, into the field where the moonlight shimmered against white drifts. And then, silence. The wind moaned across Hollow Ridge, but Isla did not return. When Weston found the girl's bed empty, his heart stuttered. A flurry of panic crashed through him. He called out, once, twice, then burst into the cold, lantern in hand, boots sinking into snow. "Hannah!" he shouted. "Isla!" Neighbors joined him. Men lit torches, dogs barked. Someone rode off to the edge of town. The ridge had not seen a search like this in years. Weston's lungs burned with each breath, but nothing mattered except finding them, both of them. One had walked away in silence. The other had gone chasing after love. The pine trees whispered overhead, their snow-laden branches groaning in the wind like old bones. The sky was a bruised canvas of storm clouds and moonlight, and every gust felt like a knife against the skin. Hannah stumbled through the darkness, her boots crunching through the crusted snow, each step heavier than the last. The lantern in her gloved hand swung wildly, casting long, shuddering shadows across the white ground. Her breath came in ragged clouds, throat raw from shouting into the void. "Slesh!" she cried again, voice cracking. "Sweetheart, where are you?" No answer, only the wind. Her boots sank deeper with every desperate step. The cold gnawed through her shawl, through wool and bone, until it reached her heart. Panic, sharp and suffocating, began to claw at her chest. She scanned the horizon, frantic eyes tracing the silver-glazed treetops, the silent drifts of snow. The lantern flickered low. Then, just beyond a slope of wind-hollowed snow, beneath the drooping branches of a lone pine, she saw it. A small shape curled in on itself. Still, too still, her heart stopped. She dropped the lantern and lunged forward, knees buckling as she hit the snow. She gasped, voice tearing at the name. The little girl stirred, barely, as Hannah gathered her into her arms. Her limbs were stiff with cold, but her eyes fluttered open. "Shh, it's all right. It's all right now," Hannah whispered, rocking her tightly against her chest. I've got you, my darling." Isla was shivering uncontrollably, her cheeks splotched with pink and her nose red from weeping. Her tiny fingers clutched Hannah's coat with desperate strength, as if afraid she might disappear again. "I thought you left forever," she hiccuped, voice muffled. And Hannah's throat ached. I thought I should." Isla shook her head, tears freezing on her lashes. "Don't," she whispered. "You make my daddy smile again." The words struck like lightning, clean, blinding, undeniable. Before Hannah could respond, she heard it, the sharp crunch of hurried footsteps behind her. She turned, squinting into the dark, and there he was. Weston. Lantern held high, breath heaving, snow clinging to his coat and beard. His eyes searched the clearing and found them. He dropped the lantern and ran. He hit the ground on his knees beside them, arms wrapping around both in a fierce, trembling hold. "Thank God," he breathed, again and again, forehead pressed to Hannah's shoulder. "Thank God." Isla reached for him with one hand, the other still clinging to Hannah. Weston cradled them both like something sacred, his silence louder than any vow. And in that silence, the snow kept falling. Finally, he drew back, eyes locking with Hannah's. The storm that had lived inside him for years was gone. In its place was raw, unguarded truth. "I never meant what you thought you heard," he said, voice soft, hoarse. "I didn't say I didn't want you. I said I didn't need another wife because—" He paused, swallowed hard. "Because I already found someone who made this house a home. Someone who brought my daughter back to life. Who made me remember I could feel again." Hannah's eyes brimmed, lips parted, but words wouldn't come. Weston reached for her hand, snow-wet, trembling, and held it tight in his own. "I didn't save you, Hannah. I watched you rise, from ashes, from hurt, and I realized I wanted to walk beside someone who could do that." He reached into his coat, pulled out a small silver ring, worn but clean, and held it between them. "Will you marry me, not because of need, but because I choose you?" Behind them, lanterns bobbed through the dark, townsfolk arriving silently, drawn by the shouts, the fear, and now the stillness. Isla nestled against Hannah's shoulder, looked up through damp lashes and whispered, "Say yes." And through tears, through years of shame and silence and aching doubt, Hannah nodded. The wedding was held beneath a cottonwood tree at the edge of the Hollow Ridge pasture, where the land sloped gently toward the valley and the sky always seemed a little closer. The branches swayed above like silent witnesses, their leaves catching sunlight and memory alike. There were no lace veils, no golden candelabras or polished pews. Just wooden benches, hand-picked wildflowers in mason jars, and the soft hum of wind through grass, and laughter, clear, joyful, rising from a little girl in braids as she darted between the rows of townsfolk. They had come, and not out of curiosity or duty, but with full hearts. They looked at Hannah not with the cold judgment of months past, but with something quieter, something like respect. Hannah wore a new dress, plain but lovely, the color of mountain cream, stitched by her own hands in the evenings when silence used to haunt her. Now it felt like a beginning. Isla, beaming, held the bouquet with both hands, proud and serious. When Weston turned to her, took her hands in his smile didn't waver. It was steady, like him, like home. And when he said, "I do," the words landed with a weight she hadn't known she needed, a promise not born in impulse, but forged in fire and time. After the ceremony, no one hurried to leave. The town stayed. They passed around pie and jugs of spiced cider. The children chased each other through the pasture, their shrieks and laughter echoing off the barn walls. And for the first time since Weston had buried his grief beneath those fields, Hollow Ridge no longer felt like a monument to loss. It felt like a home, a shared one. Weeks passed. The air grew warmer, softer. One morning, just after the frost had finally lifted, Hannah awoke to the sound of hammering outside. She stepped out barefoot, shawl wrapped around her shoulders, rubbing sleep from her eyes. Weston stood near the barn, hammer in hand, beside a half-built frame of fresh cedar. She blinked. "What's this?" He looked up, grinning. "I'm building you a room." He nodded, proud, faces east, toward the valley. "When?" He straightened, wiped the sweat from his brow. "Because you turned this place into more than fences and hay. You made it a home again. I thought it ought to have a space that belongs to you." She didn't speak, her throat too tight. By spring, the room was finished. Shelves lined the walls, filled with books. A desk sat beneath the wide eastern window, a place to write, to teach, to simply be. Word spread across the hills. By summer, Hannah had 5 students, children from neighboring farms, wide-eyed, fingers ink-stained. She taught them on the porch, Isla always beside her, tongue between her lips as she traced her letters. Sometimes Weston would lean in the doorway, arms crossed, gaze soft, as if watching a life he'd once forgotten he could have. One evening, after the last child had gone home, Hannah sat alone in the room he'd built her. The sun was dipping low, casting gold across the floorboards. On the desk lay the old wooden comb, worn smooth from touch. She picked it up, thumb running over the ridges. "The day I wore that dress," she thought, "I believed it was the last piece of love I had to offer. I thought my story ended with a whisper and shame. But then there was Hollow Ridge, and Weston, and Isla's small hand in hers." Outside, laughter rang, Isla chasing fireflies in the tall grass. Weston's voice called gently after her, "Ah, Philippe!" And in the hush between heartbeats, Hannah whispered to the wind, "I thought I had to be beautiful to be loved, but being loved made me beautiful." In a world that once only saw her flaws, Hannah Whitfield became the woman who taught a town how to see again, how to honor gentleness, how to believe in redemption, and how to call something beautiful, not because the world agrees, but because the heart knows it's true. And in Weston Dyer, she didn't find rescue. She found someone who had also been broken, and still chose to build. Their story reminds us, love isn't loud. Sometimes it's a quiet room facing east, a comb left at your door, a child's drawing with a single word that changes everything. If this story touched your heart, if you felt even a flicker of hope, warmth, or maybe a tear that caught you off guard, go ahead and tap that hype button. It tells us you believe in stories like this, in love like this. And if you haven't already, make sure to subscribe to Wild West Love Stories for more tales of devotion, defiance, and the kind of romance that rises, like Hannah did, from silence and snow. Because out here, on the edge of the frontier, hearts still find a way home.